Good afternoon and good morning to those of you joining us out west. I'm Karen Langdon with the National Emergency Management Association. Welcome to the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series. NEMA is fortunate to include among its members many of the most experienced and respected subject matter experts in the field of emergency management. Sharing the collective wisdom of these experts will help build a stronger emergency management system and a more prepared and resilient nation. We have a highly respected panel with us today to discuss integrating asylum seeker support into sustainable community solutions. A big thank you to IEM for sponsoring today's topic. And now it's my pleasure to pass the session to our moderator, Andrew Velasquez, Director of Big City Emergency Management with IEM. Welcome, Andrew. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate that. And as Karen mentioned, I am Andrew Velasquez, and I serve as Director of Big City Emergency Management at IEM. And I have the honor and the privilege of moderating today's session with this distinguished panel of subject matter experts who will give us an in-depth look and share their insights on a topic that, frankly, has challenged many jurisdictions in the emergency management and health and human services professions. That topic is the asylum seeker crisis. Now, government officials, emergency management practitioners, health and human services officials, and non-governmental and community-based organizations in major metropolitan areas and states continue to grapple with the challenges of housing and aiding thousands of migrants arriving from the southern border, many of whom are seeking asylum. Whether they're fleeing persecution, poverty, war, or economic collapse, these migrants have traveled a perilous journey, putting themselves at great risk to escape these difficulties. Many have experienced significant trauma and mental and physical health challenges. Now, although there have been many good examples of state and city-funded efforts to assist asylum seekers arriving in jurisdictions across the country, we've heard several big city mayors and governors voice concerns over the need for more help, mainly from the federal government to provide housing, education, and expedited pathways to work authorizations. In some jurisdictions, the situation has been so taxing on the infrastructure that elected officials have had to make drastic budget cuts to other critical services to fund humanitarian response operations. Notwithstanding these challenges, though, many emergency managers, health and human services professionals, NGOs, CBOs, faith-based and nonprofits, and a host of volunteers have been working day and night for nearly 2 years to assist the new arrivals arriving or transported and dropped off with little to no notice. So today, you will hear from our panelists who have been at the forefront of this humanitarian crisis in their jurisdictions, working tirelessly to meet the needs of thousands of asylum seekers. And it is now my pleasure to introduce these esteemed leaders. And I will start with Alicia Tate-Nadeau, who serves as the Director of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor. In her capacity as Illinois Homeland Security Advisor, Director Tate-Nadeau serves on the Executive Committee for the Governor's Homeland Security Advisory Council. Director Tate-Nadeau brings more than 3 decades of experience in national security, emergency management, and public safety issues. Prior to this appointment, Alicia Tate-Nadeau served as Executive Director of the Chicago Office of Emergency Management and Communications. And then prior to joining the Pritzker administration, Alicia spent more than 3 decades with the Illinois National Guard. Her time in the military included serving as the Assistant Adjutant General for the Illinois National Guard and concurrently as the Deputy Commanding General for the Army National Guard. Molly Schaeffer serves as the Interim Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Asylum Seeker Operations and has served in this capacity since May of 2023. As the Interim Director, Molly is responsible for day-to-day operations of the office, coordinating the city's response with over 20 city agencies, New York State, and federal partners. Prior to this position, Ms. Schaeffer served in multiple roles at City Hall, including as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Emergency Advisor to 2 mayors. Ms. Schaeffer brings more than a decade of experience in emergency management, public safety, and health and human services. Ms. Schaeffer has been involved in the migrant emergency since it began leading the city's humanitarian efforts that have supported more than 170,000 migrants. Ashley Frez-Clark is the director of the San Diego Rapid Response Network Support Services for Jewish Family Services of San Diego, which has been in operation since October of 2018. In this role, Ashley leads a team of more than 140 staff and hundreds of volunteers who have welcomed more than 180,000 vulnerable asylum seekers with dignity and respect. By encouraging teamwork, collaboration, and communication, Ashley leads JFS staff and partner agencies in providing welcoming and respite transition services for migrants and oversees programming to provide emergency financial assistance for individuals within San Diego County. And so at this time, I will ask each panelist to provide an overview of their locality's current situation. Then we'll dive into our discussion to learn about the practical measures and initiatives being implemented in the face of constrained resources and other challenges, such as affordable housing, to meet the needs of thousands of asylum seekers. And so kicking things off will be Interim Director Molly Schaeffer. Director?
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Since April 2022, New York City has been leading the country's response to the migrant emergency, providing critical support to over 181,000 individuals who have sought refuge and assistance from us. Can I do the next slide? Sorry, yes. So we have done this in a variety of ways, but it has been an all city response, working across more than 20 agencies, working with our state and federal partners. But just to give a sense of the numbers, and, I put this together last week, and since that, the numbers have only gone up. But we've had over 181,000 asylum seekers come into New York City since spring of 2022 and come into our shelter system. In less than 2 years, we've opened more than 217 shelter sites to deal with this. Any week, we have anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 migrants who come into our care asking for shelter. And we really focus on ways to stabilize them, to get them the supports that they need while they're in their shelter, and ways to help them along on their journey. So we look at two main things. We looked at how many people enter each week, and we look at how many people exit our shelter system each week. Our current census of migrants is 64,700. 79% of that are families with children, 21% are adults. And we have people from more than 100 countries. Our top 5 countries of origin at this point are Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, Guinea, and Senegal. That has shifted over time. We are now seeing more Chinese nationals, more Haitians, but still Venezuela and Ecuador make up the majority of the folks in our care. Next slide. Okay, so, we've had a lot of key moments in our response, but I wanted to just share a couple of them that are important to us. I think we started seeing an uptick of buses in August. We started seeing the numbers of asylum seekers into our shelter system go up in April 2022, but the first buses in August from the southern border. Around October of 2022, we declared a state of emergency as our city's shelter system was overwhelmed. And that's when we started pulling in other agencies to run shelters because the traditional model no longer worked for us. We sent people down to the border to really learn about what was happening. And then the mayor went down and talked with local officials. We released in early March of 2023, we released our blueprint on how we were going to respond, which included establishing the New York City Office of Asylum Seeker Operations. Before that point, City Hall had really been managing the different agencies working on this, but we realized we needed a long-term sustainable structure for this, and so we created an office. Our state issued a state of emergency as well, and then one of our key sites and one of the key, I think, foils for our response was On May 19th, we opened our 24/7 arrival center, which was really a first point of entry for everyone coming into the city, so we could get the same data on everyone and really have one point of entry. Before that, we had a bunch of different entries, and that was at the Roosevelt Hotel in Midtown. Then June of 2023, we opened our Asylum Application Help Center, which has helped file more than 37,000 federal asylum TPS and work authorization applications, when we really knew that the way to help people was to get them on the pathway to work and the pathway to citizenship. Next slide. Throughout all of this, as mentioned, we were getting 1,000 to 5,000 migrants each week. It costs a lot of money. It's been incredibly taxing for our infrastructure, for our ability to provide the services that we want to, for our nonprofit capacity to be able to manage shelters. And in July 19th of 2023, we began giving 60-day notices to single adult migrants. This is when we started giving the notices that said, after 60 days, you have to come back and reapply if you still want shelter. Those have been very successful. It has, at least for adults, we've seen that 76% of adults have left before 30 days, or now it's 30 days, but before 30 days or on that 30-day mark. So it's been incredibly successful. We also were able to, in early November, we opened our first shelter on federal land. So we were able to work with the federal government and open a base camp on Floyd Bennett Field for families with children. And then the last thing I would mention is that we opened a TPS clinic specifically for Venezuelans, when we were able to help push and get the federal government to allow for TPS for Venezuelans who came in before a specific point in time. And in partnership with USCIS, we were able to set up a one-stop shop where we apply for, help people apply for TPS. They give them their biometrics and their receipt right there and then, and they're on the way to work authorization. Next slide. So I just wanted to, there's obviously a lot more to our response, but I wanted to just say that our primary goals as we move forward, because again, this has been it has changed every year that we've done this, is really thinking about operational consolidation and consistency. You know, we have, as I said, more than 217 sites and lots of different agencies. We have 5 different agencies who actually do the sheltering, and a lot of different players, a lot of different nonprofits. And so we're always thinking about how we can just do this better and more consistently, so that, you know, anybody who goes into any one of our shelters has the same experience. We're really, really focused on exits from temporary shelter. What are the key things that we need to give people, to equip people with, to get them on the pathway to self-sufficiency? And that really has to do with case management, empowering resettlement, formal and informal employment, housing. How can we really get people the resources that they need? Another thing we're really, really focused on is strengthening and growing the nonprofit capacity. We know there's a lot of nonprofits who have worked with these populations for many, many years, but they tend to be smaller. And so how do we give them the tools that they need to be able to meet the need and the unprecedented scale that we're seeing? And then how do we equip our bigger nonprofits with the cultural competency to help in this situation? And then really focused on coalition building and developing consensus toward a federal platform here. You know, we are the head of Cities for Action, which is a network of more than 200 cities really focused on immigration reform. And we've really tried to pull together different cities that are working on this to think about the collective power of cities and how we can help push on the things that we need to be able to responsibly manage this. That's it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Director Schaeffer. At this time now, I will go ahead and turn it over to Director Alicia Tate-Nadeau.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. My name is Alicia Tate-Nadeau, and as mentioned, I'm the Director of Illinois Emergency Management. Next slide. And what I'm going to talk to you about is, first, I'm going to talk to you about the situation, what it's like, some statistics related to arrivals, sheltering population, and then we'll go through the process. So in Illinois, we've had over 35,000 new arrivals since August of 2022, most of those coming from Texas. And they come from a variety of different ways. That may be through a chartered bus, a plane, commuter trains, or even walk-ins. And currently, on average, we see about 100 people a day. But whenever we surge, which we've seen surges in October and December, it's about 300 a day. And we receive border information for intended destinations from the White House. And the majority of those folks that we see are coming from Venezuela. As you noted on the slide, you can see the data that I pulled on February 17th. We had 300 from Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela. At our high water point, we saw 15,000 people that were in our sheltering system. We have a capacity of just over 14,000, and the support that we use for this is really predominantly through our NGOs that are state grant funded, with 34% of our new arrivals being minors. Some of the success stories that we've seen is we have really revamped our new intake process after initial reception, and we now have a more deliberate conversation and advice to people whenever we talk about what we refer to as diversion, which is people that want to stay in the city of Chicago to link up with families, friends, or sponsors within a 50-mile radius. We usually use an Uber to do that, and we work with New Life centers to be able to do that. And then outward migration is what we define as someone who really has onward movement that they would like to do. And we work with Catholic Charities to do that. And we're focused on decreasing shelter intake and the overall population by having these early conversations. Next slide. So now I'd like to talk to you about the phases that we go through whenever we do this. Phase 0 is referred to as the incoming movement of people. The majority of the people will come through a bus, and they were coming to Union Station until about December of this year, whenever we enacted an ordinance that said buses could only drop off between certain hours and on certain days, Monday through Friday. That really did not work well for us. What we found is that we have had over 229 different buses and over 9,000 personnel that have arrived outside of the city of Chicago, and they are taking the metro or some type of means to get into the city of Chicago. So receiving that advance notice and coordination from Texas has been one of the things that we've really tried to work on to try to make sure that we have a coordinated event for people to arrive in. In phase 1, which is the reception site, I'd really like to annotate the landing zone, which is operated by the city of Chicago. That's in phase 1, with the support of the national NGOs like New Life Centers. And then we also address things like emergency medical and supplies. Many of the people that we see that are arriving in shorts and flip-flops, and whenever they're arriving in the middle of winter, we noticed the need to make sure that we had coats for them, the appropriate shoes, long pants, etc. Many of them did not have that whenever they arrive on site for us. The very first thing we do whenever they arrive is we ask them if there are any emergency medical needs, and from there we take them immediately to the hospitals if they need help. Then they move into phase 2, which is the initial processing. That's a 6-tent setup that's right next to the reception station. And that intake center is actually operated by the Illinois Department of Human Services. And it's supported by Garter World and the NGOs from New Life Centers and Catholic Charities. And this is where we do the initial screening, determine what their needs are, and facilitate onward movement through what I referred to earlier as diversion or outward migration, or to a temporary shelter. If they decide to stay with us, we move to phase 3, which is temporary shelter and case management. We are like New York City. We give 60 days. And in some of our locations, they actually call it, at the end of that 60 days, they call it an orientation graduation, because part of that sheltering, temporary sheltering, is really to orient them to the city of Chicago, to the United States, to talk about our laws that we have, and to just orient them to their new home. The city of Chicago runs approximately 22 shelters with support from our NGOs, and we have 1 state shelter. And this is where we really begin to do case management. That's legal, medical, education, our work, our wraparound services, work authorizations. And then they transfer into phase 4, which is long-term case management housing. This is a 3-month ordeal where we transition from temporary shelter to normal housing options for folks. And Illinois provides housing assistance to those that qualify, which include things like utilities, turn-on, health insurance, food assistance, and medical health. Then we move into phase 5, which is the independent integration. And that is the end of the state support for housing and sustainment for continued legal processing for immigration and citizen casework. Next slide. And what I want you to get out of this slide is really just a couple of things. There are a total of 26 different city, county, state, and federal government entities that work to make all of this happen. That does not include all of the NGOs. There are too many to count that are part of this process to really help us. The city of Chicago leads the local response for the landing zone sheltering and the majority of the funding. And Illinois Department of Human Services is a lead state agency for intake centers and for grants that go to our non-governmental organizations that are there. And with that, Andrew, I will pass it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Director. I appreciate that. And now I will turn it over to Director Ashley Frez-Clark.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here with everyone and really appreciate the opportunity to share our experience and have a conversation around surveying asylum seekers and migrants in this capacity. Next slide, please. I think it's important for to understand the context in which San Diego became part of the response, and then I'll get into kind of where we're at currently. In December of 2017, the San Diego Rapid Response Network formed as a result of needing to monitor immigration enforcement activities on the interior, and then simultaneously looking at humanitarian issues at the border. At the time that the SDRN developed, there were 4 lead agencies. It was a relatively small kind of grassroots response and plan. In 2018, however, that changed significantly when the safe release program ended from DHS. And for those that aren't familiar, that program allowed migrants to call their family members, coordinate travel before being released from Department of Homeland Security custody. So when that happened in San Diego, similarly along other Southwest borders, we saw initially 10, 20, quickly led up to hundreds of migrants being released to the streets of San Diego at various transit centers. So the call to action for the SDRN became, we need to provide some support for this group of folks that are trying to move on to their families and sponsors. That quickly turned into JFS of San Diego becoming the lead fiscal agent and operator of the first migrant shelter in San Diego. And we were receiving folks from ICE and Border Patrol at all days, all times of the day, from early morning to very late in the evening. Very limited staffing structure. It was a very grassroots process at that time. And within kind of the first 4 or 6 months, we were at 7 different locations, really trying to identify what churches we could utilize their space in. If there were any vacant buildings, we could utilize their space to operate a shelter for hundreds of folks arriving each day. So we'll fast forward to where we're at now and kind of the state of San Diego response as a whole. SDRN is now 65 plus organizations large, primarily immigration, advocacy and rights organizations, along with other humanitarian orgs. The San Diego Rapid Response Network shelter, operated by JFS, now operates out of 4 kind of primary sites, and I'll talk through those in a few moments. We're currently receiving between 200 and 250 arrivals each day at the JFS shelter. And then there's another NGO, Catholic Charities in San Diego, that is also receiving migrants from Border Patrol. And then as of late, we have started to receive a significant amount of street releases in San Diego County. It's between 700 and 800 releases each day to a kind of centralized transit center. And folks are making their way to the airport, other transit centers, by way of support from folks from the California Welcoming Task Force group, which is a collaboration of other NGOs that come together to support asylum seekers and migrants. Next slide, please. So currently our response is pretty significant when we think of our staffing and being the lead agency for our shelter. Significant volunteer response. JFS has a paid staff. We have a whole host of organizations, contracted supplemental staff that help make the operation run day to day. I would say on average, it's upwards of 400 or 500 total staff agencies that are helping with the JFS shelter alone. I had referenced that we operate out of 4 kind of primary sites. First is the port of entry in San Isidro, which is the largest land crossing border in the Western Hemisphere. We, JFS, are receiving folks that process through the CBP-1 appointment process. Currently, that's the primary group of folks that we're receiving into our shelter. Additional folks that we receive are hospital discharges, and these are folks that were either taken to the hospital by Border Patrol or directly by ambulance called by Border Patrol. And then we are also receiving vulnerable populations that are dropped off with the group of street releases. So some of the folks that are dropped off with the 700 to 800 folks at the transit center are either elderly, pregnant women, part of the LGBTQI+ community, have significant medical concerns where they're needing some additional support to be able to move on to their sponsors. We operate out of a hotel that we initially received and were part of by way of COVID response. The state of California was instrumental in helping us kind of secure that property. We continue to have that property, although COVID, as we know, has changed and those quarantine and isolation guidelines have changed as well. We also have what we call a travel center. The travel center is the location that folks will come to after going to our hotel. It's at our hotel that we do the medical screening, initial case management, travel coordination, verifying sponsorship. Then folks will move on to the travel center, and that essentially is the location that folks are waiting to travel out. Typically is the same day from their arrival to the travel center. For the folks that are not able to travel out that same day, they will stay the night at the travel center and travel out early the next morning. And then, of course, we are at transit hubs, the airport and bus stations. It seems just as often as we are at the hotel, travel center, and port of entry. We have staff and volunteers that are working with those various entities and migrants to help process through TSA and link up to their gate for onward travel. This slide here is just a snapshot of the week of February 18th to 25th of what our population looked like, demographic between children and adults. And as my peers have shared, it changes so frequently every day, every hour, which has a significant impact on how we receive folks, what type of food we provide. We have to be really aware of kind of those cultural components as we receive folks. We have a capacity of between 800 and 1,000 when we consider our hotel capacity and our travel center capacity. And then the average length of stay for most folks is 24 to 72 hours. Next slide, please. I won't go into depth on these, but we do kind of some wraparound services as well with case management, medical screening, and stabilization with a key partner, University of California, San Diego. Nutrition services, clothing is also a critical need, just as we heard prior. Legal assistance we offer throughout our shelter programming, and I'll be able to share a little bit more about that later. And then travel assistance and coordination is really significant. Our case management team is in conversation with not only the migrant in our care, but is calling every sponsor and verifying their sponsorship, their location, prior to confirming a ticket purchase to that particular location. You'll see here that the total number of folks served since 2018 was 192. Of course, this number has grown since because this was the last week of February. Next slide, please. And of course, the partners and stakeholders that come together to make this response happen and make it what it is incredibly vast, from other grassroots agencies to federal and international partners. I won't go through the list, but you can see it ranges from transportation to Save the Children to various DHS facilities, state of California as well. Next slide, please. In the model of success that we have seen over the years, and we have gone through many iterations of what our shelter needed to look like in response to how releases were happening and the countries of origins that we were seeing folks from. The public-private partnership has been incredibly valuable in both fundraising efforts, financial support, and in the operational context. The variables are changing constantly. Maintaining kind of that nimble mindset, willingness to be flexible, jump in and brainstorm wherever we need to, has been pretty significant as well. Community planning and recognizing the strength of any agency that could possibly be part of this response and building those relationships prior to the response or the thing happen has been really valuable to pick up the phone and make that call and just talk through different scenarios. Constantly engaging in risk management, different planning scenarios, and this goes into kind of advocacy level conversations locally and federally. And I believe that concludes that component. Thanks, Andrew. I'll kick it back to you.
Right, very good. Thank you, Ashley. And my thanks to Molly and to Alicia and to Ashley for providing some context to the challenges that each of you and your respective jurisdictions have and continue to face, together with the measures that you have implemented to address the needs of thousands of new arrivals. I mean, some of these numbers are just outright staggering. And, you know, this is obviously a crisis that no one entity or organization can handle alone. And so with that said, I'd like to go into, you know, some of the Q&A here. And I'd like to start by asking, what comprehensive strategies and partnerships have you put into place to manage the growing demand of migrants and the ongoing and pre-existing social issues impacting your constituents, like homelessness and affordable housing and financial hardship? And so, you know, obviously these are questions that I'm sure a lot of folks in the audience have as well. And so I'd like to start with you, Ashley.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I had mentioned that the public-private partnerships has really been key to a sustainable solution into building a comprehensive network and plan around serving migrants and asylum seekers. Truly the investment from all levels of government is really vital. And quite frankly, in San Diego, we have not seen that locally across all levels of government. So that is a pretty significant advocacy piece that we continue to talk about. And by doing this, it really does allow the response to be impactful. I think one of the interesting components that we have within the shelter is that partnership with UCSD, the medical team. And really since the beginning of our response in 2018, they have always played some role in the medical care of migrants in our care. And they have continued to grow and develop their footprint within the shelter. They are responsible for what they would call, if they were here, as screen and stabilization model. They are not doing long-term treatment, long-term care, but their goal is to make sure folks are safe and can travel safely to their sponsor, whether that be air or bus travel. They also are responsible for prescribing any medications that folks might need along their journey. By having them part of our system, we have seen a less than 1% referral rate to the emergency department from our shelter. And then I'll also add that another component that we recently finalized, I think we're in month 2 of our pilot, is a hospital coordination referral system. And what we had seen from hospitals, we heard from local hospitals, and we heard from Border Patrol alike that folks were having to go to the hospital immediately post-crossing for urgent medical needs. And once they were ready to be discharged from the hospital, there wasn't a plan, right? Border Patrol was not able to take them back into Border Patrol custody. There wasn't a paperwork put together for them. So this plan with the hospital coordination system and the EDs and ERs were becoming very quickly overwhelmed. JFS had established in partnership with the San Diego and Imperial Counties Hospital Associations a Microsoft form that is actually relatively simple, but the communication structure with their social workers, their docs for who is going to populate this referral form with basic information about the migrant, whether they had paperwork, if they had to be released from the hospital with medications, any assistive devices. And that form really allowed for the shelter staff to do a quick visual on who is being referred. Our UCSD team could also do a quick visual, follow up with any questions that they had prior to receiving those folks into our care, making sure that there was also a safe hospital discharge plan to come into our shelter. Our shelter is a respite shelter. It is not a long-term shelter. So we needed to make sure that the folks being discharged were being discharged in a safe way.
Well, thank you, Ashley. And I would also like to welcome the input, from Director Tate-Nadeau and Director Molly Schaeffer. So, Director Nadeau.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. So first, whenever I think about a comprehensive strategy to the office, I really think about the Office of New Americans that was started up. That was really a key turning point for us in the mayor's office to begin to think about, how we're going to handle this systemic issue that we have with the asylum seekers. And the next thing that I really think of is the role that the Illinois Department of Human Services has played with grants to our NGOs. I cannot overemphasize how important our NGOs are. We just flat could not do this without the relationship. And if I could advocate to the group that we have here today, start thinking about who your NGOs are that could really come and work with you and what their capabilities are. Many of our NGOs today are working in a number of different areas. Just about everyone that you heard from today talked about Catholic Charities and the role that Catholic Charities plays. They play an immense role. So they have really been a key advocate for us. The next one that to go off what Ashley said, thinking about some of the social issues or the urgent medical care, public health at all levels, be it city, county, or state level, have really jumped in and have worked with our healthcare providers to provide healthcare at every single level. People are coming to the United States, into our states, in a weakened state, both mentally and physically, and we have to address those immediately before we can really begin to address some of their other needs. We've got to get them healthy physically, and so we work with them. And then as they progress through, and you heard me talk about, at the end of 60 days, one of our shelters actually does like a graduation ceremony for them. Then we have to be able to address their financial needs. And that is done through really working with our legal group. We have a group of NGOs that work with us on the legal side to really help them with their work permits and to allow them to move forward with their asylum seeking. So those would be the key points that I'd bring up, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Director. And I will turn it over to Molly Schaeffer for some input as well.
Thank you. And I think I follow a lot of my fellow webinar colleagues in that, What I will say is that New York City had a homelessness crisis and affordable housing crisis before this happened. I think we have the nation's largest shelter system. You know, we started our administration with 45,000 people in shelter. We're now at 120,000 people in shelter. So we've almost nearly tripled our shelter system. But what we've really been able to do and what we've really focused on is how can we create places where you can get everything that you potentially need. So we talk about our arrival center where we screen people, we figure out where they are in their immigration status. We ask all the relevant questions. If they have other places to go, we offer them reticketing. We really start to figure out who the person is and start them on the case management journey before we put them into shelter. And that is a partnership between many of our different agencies, including our Department of Education, who's on site, and with input from a lot of different nonprofits and a lot of different nonprofits on site. We also, our Asylum Application Help Center was a model that we developed, and we have lots of nonprofit, legal providing nonprofits, pro bono support, private support to really make sure that we're getting as many people connected to their legal pathways as possible before their 1-year timeline is up. We're really working across government to get funding to the nonprofits that do this work well, and really get out of their way to really help resettle people. And that's been something that we're really, really focused on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Director. And, you know, I know that, you know, resettlement efforts and successfully integrating, you know, new arrivals into the community has been a top priority for many of you. And so I'm interested in learning, and there's been some questions that have come in on the chat about this as well, with regard to resettlement, but I'm interested in learning, and I'm sure, again, the audiences as well, about how efforts are being made to sort of foster, you know, social connections and inclusion of asylum seekers and migrants within the communities that you have sort of jurisdiction over at the present time. And one of the questions that came in from the chat relative to this particular question was, you know, what does, you know, resettlement actually mean? What does full resettlement mean? Does it mean fully independent? And so I throw that in there as one of the questions that has come in from the chat, because I'll do my best to align what's coming in from the chat to some of the questions that I'm posing to you. So I will start with Director Alicia Tate-Nadeau for this question.
Well, as Clayton put in the chat, we've had over 11,000 people that are fully resettled. And to us, that means being independent. They've moved on to a family, a friend, or they're living independently. And so that is true success. They are now working, they've got their work authorizations, and they are a productive part of society. Just like everyone else, this group, if you really want to integrate them from the very beginning, you know, having the social connections is a key part of the integration into their communities. And we do that by a couple of different mechanisms. First and foremost, I have to really say thank you again to the NGOs that we work with that have worked everything from working with us on nutritional and, you know, making sure that we have the appropriate foods available, to talking about social sensitivities to, say, for example, law enforcement. Some of the different countries that people are coming from, they've had a completely different experience as it relates to law enforcement or people in uniform. So, you know, sensitizing them to these are safe people, safe places for you, working with communities. One of our shelters is the state-ran shelter is actually in Little Village in Chicago, which is predominantly a Puerto Rican neighborhood, and they have just embraced this group of people. that are coming in. And during the holidays, many different festivals and outreach from communities to, making sure that the different holidays that we have are celebrated and they're included in those. Churches have really, of all denominations, have really stepped up and taken on this piece. And I would just say you can't overemphasize just how important it is. If you want full integration of a group of people, you've got to address this side of it. We cannot just focus on, the physical needs or the mental needs. You've got to make sure that people feel grounded in part of an actual community.
Thank you, Director Tate-Nadeau, and Director Schaeffer. I'd like to welcome your input here as well.
Thank you so much. And I think I echo a lot of what Director Tate-Nadeau said. I think we consider resettlement sort of being independent of our shelter system. We've had more than 60% of the people who've come through our care have left. And that really has to do with our reticketing efforts, our case management efforts, our legal supports. We've been working to get people connected to our job placement, especially when we have people who've applied for work authorization. It really, New Yorkers have really stepped up to try to integrate people into their communities. I think a lot of that work happens around school communities. We have more than 36,000 new arrivals in our school system, and the school staff and the parents of those communities have been really, really great. But we've also done a whole host of things via volunteers, via the faith communities. A lot of our houses of worships have adopted shelters and getting, donations or meals and all of that to the shelters. And we've also, we have a Girl Scout troop in one of our sites. Like, we've done a lot of efforts to try to get groups into our shelters and really connect the people in our care to things that are going on in the neighborhood, and also connect them to the communities of people who are from the same nationality, because obviously we have more than 100 nationalities in our shelter system right now. So we want to make sure that people are connected to other people that understand the circumstance that they're going through.
Excellent. And Director Frez-Clark, any additional input from your end?
Yeah, I think just briefly, I had shared that most of our folks end up traveling on, and it's about 98% that do travel out within that 24, 72-hour time frame. However, that small percent that ends up being what we call our long-term families, there is a significant amount of effort to develop community even within that space while they're still our care and in a respite shelter environment. So we also have worked with the San Diego Unified School District to get school-aged children into the school system while they're with us. We work with International Rescue Committee locally for mid to long-term case management support and conversations around what other communities and networks can migrants become part of while they're in this kind of mid-shelter space for our care. And really maintaining the relationships with other San Diego homeless service providers and doing appropriate referrals that have been really workshopped outside of the typical referral process to the homeless service provider network. There's probably 5 or 6 shelters that we do work very closely with, recognizing that the population we serve is different than the typical population we would see in other homeless service provider shelters here locally.
Excellent. Now we know that stable income is a key to resettlement, and as you are aware, there have been challenges. I mean, and I've heard of a number of jurisdictions saying that there are landlords that are reluctant to rent to asylum seekers because of no guarantee of stable income. And so, Director Schaeffer, you mentioned some of this in your presentation with regard to some of the innovative things that New York is doing relative to, standing up some of these TPS clinics and one-stop shops to help people out with, filling out their various applications. But I thought I'd ask, are there any other innovative things that are being done in some of the other jurisdictions that might be beneficial for the audience to hear? And so I'd like to start with you, Director Tate-Nadeau.
Well, first of all, I think one of the strengths is really just ingenuity, people thinking about problems or issues in an uncommon way. And as it relates to looking at how we get work permits, one of the legal assistance groups that we had ventured out into the AI realm, artificial intelligence, to be able to do that. We often talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of AI. But in this case, what we saw is that we may have people that are, English is a second language for them. So and you can't always find legal assistance that is Spanish speaking in nature. So what they have done is they've come up with a questionnaire, first of all, that triages people before they go forward for their work authorization to find out where there might be issues. And if they can type it in using Spanish and then it converts it into English. Or if they can't read or write, they have the opportunity to speak it in, and then it will change the language. And that is done for a myriad of different, not just Spanish, but for a myriad of different languages, which, as you've heard, the folks from New York City and from California talk about, we predominantly have a group, but you could see multiple different countries or groups of people that are coming in. And I really thought 2 weeks ago, whenever I was down visiting and looking at how we do the work permits, I really thought that was an innovative way of being able to address some of the issues that we were seeing with folks and getting their paperwork done.
Thank you, Director. And any additional input from either Director Frez-Clark or any additional information, Director Schaeffer?
I can jump in. It sounds like we all have a relationship with USCIS in some way, shape, or form. And JFS recently had USCIS come into our shelter space this past November, and it really has, I think, changed the positive outlook for migrants in our care, where they can actually feel that they could become part of the workforce faster by having folks work with USCIS, get their pictures taken in our care. They're seeing their work permits come back within 6 weeks, as opposed to a year, 2 years. So before, that small percentage of folks that are in our care in that kind of long-term family status, some of them are getting their work permits while they're still in our care. So, I mean, ultimately that allows them to be able to seek financial and housing stability faster and become kind of part of the community, which is what they are wanting to do, and provide a better life for themselves and their families.
Well, and Director Schaeffer, and just in listening to your presentation and hearing some of your commentary relative to this, I know there's a lot of innovative things going on in New York City, but is there any additional information that you'd provide for the benefit of the audience?
No, I mean, I think that the truth of the matter is that most people that we have are working right now. They have found work in the informal economy. So we're constantly looking at what we can do there to make sure that people know their rights and that that people are able to sustain themselves while they're waiting for their work permits, because as we know, it's a long and arduous process. And then part of our relationship with USCIS, the White House, and the federal government has really been pushing on what are the parts of the asylum application, what are the parts of the TPS application or the work authorization application that could be more streamlined, could be easier, especially from a pro se perspective. So things as simple as they require a 2-hole punch. Nobody has a 2-hole punch. Like, there's simple things and there's really complicated things, like allowing us the ability to file everything online, regardless if people need a fee waiver or not, that we've really been pushing for. And I think that's been a really great benefit of these federal clinics, is our ability to have that communication and really push for those things.
Excellent. Thank you, Director. Now, you've all mentioned that you've seen just a number of organizations stepping up to the plate to assist with wraparound services, the provision of shelter, food, clothing, and so much more. And we've seen the faith community, rise to the occasion and assist with so many of these challenges that are being faced within your respective jurisdictions. And so my next question really focuses on, what ways have you seen that interfaith collaboration and partnership being used to help address the diverse needs of the asylum seekers? And I'll start with you, Director Tate-Nadeau.
So I can't really think of any area of this entire process that the interfaith community does not play a role. Literally every single step, every single phase that we have an interfaith group that is either connected to an NGO or they take it upon themselves to fill a void that we see. And again, what I would say is that if you haven't thought about having those very strong, robust relationships in advance of this, I'd encourage you to do it now and find out who has, expertise in particular areas that they can address some of your needs. And whenever you go to them, have a list of those things that you want them to work on. If it could be anything from, how do we help people connect people to a job fair or jobs themselves, to how do we make sure that we have culturally sensitive medical care associated with, with the group of people that we're dealing with, to nutritional needs, to really the connection to the community itself. In each of those, they play an integral part of this. So I think that it's incumbent upon us in government to go to them with, here are the things that we would really like for you to do. Otherwise, what you will end up with is a large group of interfaith folks that are working in one particular area, and you still have a gap or a need in another area. But what I have seen is that if you go to them with a specific need or requirement, they will meet that challenge for you.
Thank you, Director. And I know, Director Schaeffer, you've also mentioned just the strong collaboration that has existed with not just the faith community, but other NGOs. And so just wanted to provide you with an opportunity to share some additional input here.
Thank you. I mean, I think that one of the key tenets of our House of Worship collaboration is our faith bed program. So we were able to set up a system where faith communities are using some of their unused space or underutilized space to actually house asylum seekers, provide food for them, provide community for them, and really take care of them. We have a whole host of other things that the faith community is doing for us, including, donations, adopting shelters, helping us with advocacy. But it's really, I really do think that our faith bed program is pretty innovative because, you know, those are not traditional spaces where you would house people.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much, Director. And as I said before, you know, some of the questions that are coming into the chat really align with some of the questions that I'm asking all of you. And so I thought there was one question that recently came in relative to NGOs, and specifically the question was there a mention of utilizing NGOs for post-release follow-up services? Are there any contractual requirements tied to response funding for those NGOs related to what those follow-up services look like? And I know that Clayton from Illinois answered that from the IEMA perspective, but Ashley, didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And JFS has utilized a lot of different funding sources from local, state, and federal resources, private philanthropy. And quite frankly, we do the response that we need to serve the migrants in a culturally competent and welcoming way. And then we will kind of look at what funding we have available, what the reporting requirements are for that particular funding source, and supply that report as needed. So there are very few funding streams that we have currently that dictate our response. And I think it's where that kind of public-private partnership and model really come to be, so that there can be a nimble and flexible response, because it is ever changing, although there's some kind of primary key components that stay the same, but we have to have the ability to be flexible in how we respond. And I think that kind of speaks for border communities, interior communities, that flexibility is really critical.
Thank you, Director. And any additional input from you, Director Schaeffer?
No, I mean, I think most of our system is run by nonprofits that we contract with. So each of it has our own governing needs. I mean, we have we have more than $10 billion over 3 years tied into this response. So we, you know, and in many different parts of the system, but, you know, we would love to have more flexible funding from the federal government to be able to give to our nonprofits.
Sure. Well, thank you. You know, we've heard a lot about the trauma that has been experienced by those that have traveled such long distances, and I don't want to get into any graphic details here, but many asylum seekers have experienced some very stressful events on their journey. And I wanted to ask if you can share any sort of best practices, you know, with the audience, and how your jurisdiction is working to address, you know, the physical and mental health needs of asylum seekers in your care. And I'll begin with Director Frez-Clark on this one.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll say that when we first opened the shelter, one of the initial asks from many in the community, whether it was nonprofits or different universities, was, we're available to provide therapy. How can we help provide some therapy, recognizing the significant trauma that folks have gone through? Now, we're a respite shelter, and when therapy starts, it can be very difficult to open and close conversations or close wounds before folks travel on, and not knowing what resources would be available once they step off the plane or the bus to continue those kind of trauma healing conversations. So it did cause us to kind of reflect on how we could either engage those partners, create different strategy or supportive conversations. And there's a few things that have happened. One, we have really ramped up the type of training that we offer to our staff and volunteers. And that ranges from verbal intervention to crisis intervention, human trafficking awareness, mandated reporter training. And I mean, there's a list of many others, but those are kind of the few that come to mind. So in addition to that, we have put training and effort into how to have de-escalating conversations with our guests. And where there are situations where behavioral health concerns are beyond the scope of what our shelter staff or what UCSD can offer our migrants, we utilize the kind of crisis response hotlines. And it's a little bit different, right? We don't just give a phone number to the migrant to say, here, call, because that is not going to be helpful. Calling a crisis line for many of our guests is scary. They don't know what it is. So our staff accompany them and sit with them on the phone while they talk through kind of concerns with a counselor. There are many kind of language services that either JFS can tap into or the crisis line will tap into. Our staff, many of our staff are bicultural, bilingual as well, which is helpful. But our staff will sit alongside the migrant while they're on the phone to develop safety plans or just continue that kind of therapeutic conversation. The other piece that we have really worked hard on is there are instances where we have single parent households come into our care. And if the adult is falling ill, the children cannot go to the hospital with the adult. So we have worked out a relationship and agreement with Child Protective Services. And initially that was a scary concept for us because this is not an abuse or neglect scenario, but we are a respite shelter that does not provide childcare. And CPS was able to link us up with other housing partners that are part of the foster care kind of network that children could stay with different households. And then when the adult was ready to be discharged from the hospital, the family would be reunified without kind of concern about their reunification, which is very different from the traditional CPS referral. So that's been a successful relationship over the past few years, and we continue to evolve it as responsibilities from CPS shift and our program shifts as well. But I think that's a pretty unique partnership that we've been able to develop.
Thank you so much, Director. And Director Tate-Nadeau, I would welcome your input here as well.
I think Ashley said it very well. First of all, I think looking at the culturally competent way that we deal with folks, flexible funding, families versus singles. Sometimes we have to really address the human trafficking awareness piece. Many times it's very subtle, and it's the grooming of this has occurred before they ever left their original destination. So talking about some of that so that they understand that this is not a normal way of doing things. I think back to a particular instance where a young woman was coming into the country and she was given a phone number and told whenever you get to the United States and you get to a particular area, call this number and this individual will take you in. She did not know who that person was. She thought it was someone just giving a open hand to help her. And we really had to work with her and talk to her about, let's try to get you with a family member or a community, someone that you know, versus going to a stranger. And we were able to divert that. And I think that's a real success story. Even if you can divert one person from being put into a human trafficking situation, I think that's key. The other one is really the crisis response training that we have to give all of everyone who's working in this area. You really have to, focus on the workforce itself to make sure that the workforce that's supporting all of this understands what to look for, what some of the signs and symptoms are. And then I think on the de-escalation, or, talking about how do you open, to really work with people that have gone through traumatic situations, there's usually long-term mental health that needs to occur. And we have tried to incorporate that in every step of our process, from the time that they originally walk in the door off of the bus to the time that we put them into long-term housing, is to gradually give them a little bit more so that we can work on some of those challenges. And Ashley, I love some of the things that you said and how you all were approaching that. And I think I'm actually going to take that back to our group also. So this is really valuable for me also to learn from other places.
Director Tate-Nadeau, thank you so much. And Director Schaeffer, I'd like for you to comment as well on this, but there was a question that came in from the chat, specific to New York City, and it was related to, physical needs, physical concerns, protective measures, if you will. And the question was specifically related to, what protection, security measures are being considered when the migrants arrive, and the specific reference was made to Floyd Bennett Field. So I wanted to know if you could answer that question about whatever security or protective measures are being taken for the migrants as they arrive to these shelter locations.
Okay, well, I'll just also mention, like most of my fellow webinar colleagues, that what we do is we do a mental and a physical health screening at the point of entry so that we get at least a baseline on everybody. We do vaccinations on site. We also are able to replenish people's medications on site, which has been really valuable. I know I have lots of horror stories of people coming off buses and being in pretty bad medical condition. One example is a 5-year-old kid whose epilepsy medication was taken at the border and then had a seizure as he was getting off the bus, and that that we really are able to replenish people's medication and also get them connected to New York. Our health and hospital system is the one who runs our arrival center. So they're also able to help connect people to whatever medical follow-up needs they have. In terms of security, the safety of the migrants in our care and the rest of New York City is incredibly important to us. The mayor is a former cop. This is something we take incredibly seriously. We've had situations where we've had sites, we've had sites which are unpopular in certain areas. When you're opening 217 sites, they're going to be unpopular in certain neighborhoods. One example sticks out in my mind where we opened a site and there was residents throwing rocks at the bus of families with children as they were coming in. We have a really intense relationship with our fire department, a really intense relationship with our police department to make sure that when there are situations like that, we have folks on site who can help make sure that the people on site are safe. I think in terms of Floyd Bennett Field, there is a lot of space on Floyd Bennett Field. It is a large, large site. And we, worked with the National Park Service. We worked with our police department to ensure that, we had places where people can walk in and out. We have transportation off the base camp. We haven't had any particular safety issues that I know of on that site, but it's not, there's a lot of, that one in particular is not as big of a concern to me as other parts, specifically in residential areas where people are not as welcoming.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that input, Director. And, understanding that many asylum seekers come from different backgrounds, and you've mentioned all of the backgrounds, Director Schaeffer, that you've been dealing with in the New York City shelter system. But they come with many different backgrounds, experiences, and cultures. And so I guess my next question really focuses on what unique elements of service provision should be considered when working with this population when compared to U.S. citizens. And so, Director Schaeffer, I'll start with you.
I mean, I think it starts at the very beginning. I think we've talked about this before, but even the people come to us in shorts and flip-flops. It's cold during winter. It's the needs to completely re-establish someone's life. So whatever is needed in terms of clothing, medical care, vaccines are different in other countries, ensuring that people have the right medical connections, and making sure that they have the right type of trauma-informed care or connections to, if we're seeing anything around human trafficking. Specifically with this group, I'd also really mention, I think we've mentioned it before, but legal pathways. That is a really big need is the need to figure out legal pathways, and then language, of course. We have lots of different languages spoken. We also have lots of different regions that don't necessarily speak some of the top 10 languages. And so it's really figuring out how we're communicating with people. And that's something I would take back if I did this again, making sure that we have a really good language access for everybody.
Thank you, Director. And Director Frez-Clark, I'd like to welcome your input here as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree 100%. There's the direct service delivery from food, clothing. One of the other really significant considerations is around perspective and having anyone who's involved in the response understanding what has occurred or is occurring in the countries of origin of folks that are in our care. And an example of this is we recently are seeing an increase of folks from Haiti, and our staff were experiencing people were not wanting to wait in line. There was a little bit of agitation around that. And when we think around what is occurring in Haiti and how people receive basic needs, there is no waiting in line. And it took some of our staff from Haiti to say, like, this is not part of their day-to-day living. Like, this is a new concept, and it seems pretty simple, right? To us, wait in line to receive X service or X item. But having our staff understand the perspective of our guests helps with the interaction on the day-to-day and the de-escalation components. So I think that perspective has really been helpful. And I'll just echo Director Schaeffer's comments on legal pathways and what that can look like when folks are or have arrived into the country, and even perhaps before arriving to the country, and what those programs could look like, and continuing to be creative, thinking outside the box with all the partners from all the entities is going to be really critical in that.
Excellent. Thank you, Director. And Director Tate-Nadeau, just your thoughts here?
Well, I'd just like to echo just a couple of things. First and foremost, really the legal pathways is a critical element to this whole thing. We bring people all the way in. They've gone through a tremendous amount of trauma and personal investment to make this journey to the country. And if we can't work on the legal pathways to get them here, we really have not achieved full integration. So we really focus a lot on that. I think that's something that I think of a lot. The other one is the trauma-informed care. And that really goes hand in hand with the social norms, understanding where people come from, what normalcy looks like, and where they came from and what it looks like here in the United States, and that educational process to be able to do that. The other thing that I would say is that English as a second language is also a key indicator of success for many folks, and being able to get people the resources that they need, particularly with such a large, percentage of children that are coming in with their families, to be able to find schools and educational processes that can really handle English as a second language to be able to address many of our issues, I think is a key takeaway that we have.
Thank you, Director Tate-Nadeau. And as we're winding down here with our time, I do have one more question. And then there's two questions from the chat that I also would like to ask that align with this last question. And, the question is as follows. Knowing what you know now, and given the last 2 years, what would you advise your counterparts listening today to consider, or what should they know if a busload of migrants is dropped into their jurisdiction tomorrow? And there was a question that came in from the audience relative to, asking all of you, the panelists, about any training and competency gaps that other jurisdictions should be aware of to best serve migrants and local partners. It's gaps related to federal emergency management versus, other, emergency management entities. So I want you to keep that in mind. And then there's a question about, the benefit of migrants coming to this country and the positive impact from, an economic perspective. And so, because we've heard that there are, certainly a lot of challenges, involved, but as one of the guests noted in the chat, that there are also some positive results, like, the economic impact. And so, have you seen, this and possibly other positive impacts in this surge that you can share, with the guests today? And similarly, what would you advise or share with them again if a busload of migrants were to be dropped off, in their jurisdiction tomorrow? So just wanted to wrap up with that. So I will start with Director Tate-Nadeau on this one.
Well, that was a mouthful, Andrew. I think we could probably make an entire seminar just on this one question. First of all, thinking about core competencies, this is where I think emergency management really shines, in being the convener and understanding who really has the core competency in a particular area. As you go through this, I'd encourage the audience to really think of the government and the NGOs that are out there, who has what core competencies, and to kind of group and loop those together. And thinking about, from the city perspective to the county, to the state, to the federal government, who has what capabilities and how can they be brought to bear. The second part of that is to really put together a rhythm where you all meet at the city, county, state, and federal level, and think about, how you share those best practices in doing something. And I would also go so far as to say, think about the other states that are doing these missions. It is not by chance that we're on this panel together. California, New York, Washington, D.C., many others, along with Chicago, we share best practices. No one has a cornerstone on what a best practice looks like. Related to the positive impacts, there are positive impacts to this. We actually have, industry that comes to us and says, look, we really need this workforce. And they have been integral to helping us with, and encouraging the work permits and getting people into a work environment because they need the workforce that is there. And the last one that I would mention is, thinking about what I wish I knew now that I didn't know then is we thought whenever we enacted the bus ordinance in the city of Chicago, our real thought was, these people are going on very long journeys from Texas, and it would be better if they could arrive refreshed during the day after a long journey. We'd be able to give respite to our workforce that we had. And really, by enacting that bus ordinance, what we found is that this is a 24/7, 365-day program that we run, and it's not going to stop. And we had some unintended outcomes that came from that, which included buses being dropped out in other counties, which meant that our very centralized program became very decentralized in the first phase of the operation. And we then had to go and modify and change how we did things. So that was one of the big takeaways that I took from this.
Thank you, Director. And Director Schaeffer, I will welcome your input on this question and the additional 2 questions that came in from the chat. So thank you. You're on mute, Director.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so I think we have a lot of untapped potential in our shelter system right now, and we can't tap it unless there is a faster, more expedited pathway to work authorization. And so that really is with the federal government, and it's something that we constantly talk about because I think we know the benefit that these individuals will play in the economy. We know the benefit they're already playing in the informal economy. A lot of people are delivering food. I think 60% of I heard this stat recently, 60% of our construction industry, the people who build our buildings, are undocumented. We know what this does for our economy, but we need a faster, more expedited way for people to work. And I will say that until I'm blue in the face. I think if I had to do this over again, or not over again, but what I would tell to other receiving cities is to really start thinking about this as long-term. I've dealt with a lot of emergency responses where, you do everything you can to manage the problem right in front of you without, and then you sort of deal with and stabilize the situation, and then you deal with the long-term impacts. This is something that's now been going on for 2 years. When you get that first bus, it's usually not one bus, it will be more buses. And so you really have to think about the long-term infrastructure of your community to manage this kind of effort. And what are you willing to put on the table in terms of sheltering, in terms of working with your nonprofits? Are you going to leave it to your nonprofits? Are you, as the city or county or state, going to manage it? And how are you going to deal with the specific needs around immigration?
Thank you, Director Schaeffer. And Director Frez-Clark, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we have experienced, and when we first started and a little bit currently locally, is this response does not fit within the typical emergency management response structure. There in San Diego, California, there is not an emergency declaration, and we know that when that declaration happens, there is a release of funding, there's a release of support. And when that doesn't happen, we need to be creative still in figuring out how to provide the critical services to migrants. So I guess I would challenge this group in thinking through how we can kind of break open that box and mindset to kind of be all encompassing. We've heard that this is going to be an ongoing response. And when JFS started this, we were like, 3 or 4 months, that's how long we're going to have to shelter. And we're coming up on 6 years. And it is certain that this service will need to be in place long term. And having that kind of permanent infrastructure that is separate from the homeless service provider community is really critical to ensure that these services can continue and burnout doesn't continue longer than it has. That public-private partnership model is critical that, of course, my colleagues have spoken to, and carrying that not only from the service delivery perspective, but advocacy for kind of the federal fiscal responsibility to local jurisdictions is going to continue as well. And then I would just say to expect the unexpected, and whatever is happening today, it will change and continue to be solution oriented, and asking those questions that kind of feel like impossible or very improbable, because it's from those questions that all of the innovation happens and we can continue to do what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Director. And unfortunately, we are out of time. And as you said, Director Tate-Nadeau, we can spend an entire other 2 or 3 hours discussing this critically important matter. So I would just like to take the opportunity to thank all of you, our panelists, for your wisdom, your insight, your valuable contributions, concerning the topic that in many respects has challenged and continues to challenge the emergency management profession and NGOs and nonprofits to its core. And I'd like to thank the National Emergency Management Association, NEMA, for their commitment to advancing the emergency management profession by providing these important empowerment e-learning webinars, and providing IEM with the opportunity to host today's panel discussion. So, and certainly not last but not least, I'd like to thank the audience participants for attending today's event. Your presence and your participation helped make this a very engaging experience, and we hope you were able to gain some valuable insights from today's discussion. So with that said, I will turn it over to Karen for some final closing comments.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you again to IEM for sponsoring today's session, and to the presenters, Alicia, Ashley, Molly, and of course, Andrew, for leading the discussion today. And thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you also to the great audience for participating. You can find out more about the NEMA Empowerment e-learning series and how to sponsor one of your own on the NEMA website, www.nemaweb.org. As a reminder, there'll be a short survey coming to you via email, and we would appreciate your feedback. In case you missed any of today's session or wish to share it with your colleagues, you'll find the recording on the NEMA YouTube channel, NEMA for You, very soon. Thank you again for attending. Take care, stay well, and have a productive rest of your day. Bye, everyone.